welcome to Bleach Revisited. I am Carker Gold, your host of this series in which we will be reading every single chapter of the Bleach manga, providing critical analysis of the art and the narrative, as well as personal response to each of these chapters. We'll also be discussing how the chapter connects to the rest of the series as a whole. As usual, we begin these videos with a reading of the chapter that we are discussing for the episode. This is Chapter 97, Talk About Your Fear. He dodged it? How? You're wondering how I evaded it. It's good to strike between serial attacks. Your timing was perfect. So, why didn't you kill me? The answer's pretty simple. You're too slow. I'm too far out of your league. Very simple. Brutally so. Understand? You can't save Rukia because you're already dead. Ichi! Bleach, Chapter 97. Talk About Your Fear. You can't run away. Are you crazy? You tried to stab me for real just now. I'd been killed if I hadn't run. Of course. I'm doing my best to corner you, Mr. Kurosaki. Corner you and drive you to the edge. You must be able to deliver it at any time, anywhere. The killing blow. Cut me some slack. That was luck before. I can't do it on command. You have to be able to do it on command. You're on the verge of learning how to fight. By activating the true Zenpakuto, you have talent, but your strength is 3rd seat or 4th seat level at best. The strength of Soul Reaper, your officers, is enormous. To be their equal, you must have control of this. Yeah, but I was so desperate then. I don't even remember how I did it. I know, which is exactly why I'm driving you to the edge to make you remember. Subject crash into Rocky Boot! Medics on the way! Not yet. Jeez. Boss! What a disgrace. I press you a little and you fall apart. Look at yourself. It's disgusting. What a disappointment. Mr. Kurosaki, your sword resonates only with fear. When you evade, it's, I'm afraid to be killed. When you attack, it's, I'm afraid to kill. Even when you're trying to protect someone, it's, I'm afraid she'll die. Your sword speaks only of fear. That's all wrong. Fear won't bring you victory in battle. Nothing is born of fear. If you evade, it should be, he's not going to kill me. If you're protecting someone, it should be, I won't let her be killed. If you're attacking, it's kill. See? Do you hear what my sword resonates with? It's the resolve to kill you. So you are capable of resolve. Don't ever forget that feeling. Sorry to keep you waiting, Renji. I'm resolved to kill you. What the? How did he? Ha! That is it for chapter 47, title of which I talk about fear. I think it's talk about fear. Talk about your fear. Talk about your fear. Make sure that I get back to the beginning here. There we go. All right. let's talk about your fear, huh? So let's get into this chapter. Obviously, pretty eventful turnaround as Ichigo, who was at the precipice of defeats, is then reminded of, kind of his resolve and why he's fighting, right? I do love this initial panel where we see just Ichigo sundered, broken away. He's coughing. He's amazed that Renji was able to dodge at the last minute. And as we come to learn from this chapter, it's because Ichigo lacked resolve with his attack, that he had such a kind of weak approach that he wasn't trying to actually kill Renji here. Um, and so because of that, his attack wasn't really landing, right? Um, and of course, Renji explains, yeah, perfect timing, but you're too slow. And that kind of sluggard answer. Like, even if he was timing it perfectly between the attacks, he was too slow to land the actual attack because he faltered. Ichigo wasn't trying to kill Renji, right? And so Renji really reiterates that, and I love this close up shot that we get. We get Renji's foot ostensibly from Ichigo's perspective as he's kind of cowed over here. Renji steps forward, and we get this very close up of Renji, and of course Ichigo looks absolutely defeated, right? So we're starting to kind of understand the gulf between these two, that Renji's here really ready to live and die by his admittedly foolish assumption that Rukia can't be saved, but nevertheless, like, he is so assured that you could not possibly save Rukia that he will die by that conviction. And so, of course, Ichigo, who very much believes that he's going to save Rukia, is not ready to really strike somebody to kill them, or at least he had forgotten about that. He's still freshly in that, and I love this raise up where you see the top of Zabimaru, Renji lifting his sword up, and then that. Like, this is a good 3 panel. I mean, you could have just started with this panel, but as far as an arrangement, this really evokes like the lifting of the sword and more panels to really draw attention to this killing blow that's about to come and strike down, right? And yeah, I love that, of course, also it streaks down the middle, down from where Renji's lifting the sword at the top. It's just a solid arrangement. And of course, speaks towards Renji's own convictions. But I love that he comes down with this powerful slash, and we immediately fade into flashback, right? But if we read this chapter without the flashback there, like, Renji comes down to slice Ichigo and he just grabs it, which is pretty hardcore, right? With his bare hands, Like, come on, man. But we do flash back to Ichigo training with Kisuke, and I do like that. Like, we had that training off screen, but now through flashback, we're kind of retroactively learning these things, because it wouldn't be as significant to have all these scenes with Kisuke, because they would kind of been rough momentum. But having Ichigo flash back to this training that he had and find that these lessons were really resonant here and there, I think is an effective way to do it. Now, yes, you could call out, like, as much, well, if you did something off screen and you're like, oh, well, he just trained off screen, and then for any battle you could pull whatever you want and then just have a flashback and be like, see, he learned it then, right? That's why you kind of sprinkle in things to hint towards what that training was, right? You could do different things there. Does Bleach do it that well? Maybe not. I think Chainsaw Man is a perfect example of this done very well, where there's a lot of training that happens in Chainsaw Man, kind of off screen with a guy that's training both the characters Denji and Power, and then later Denji has to fight a very strong opponent, the Katana demon opponent, and he's able to defeat him with something that he learned in training that was kind of withheld from us because it was a kind of dynamic reveal. But there are enough hints throughout that were really showing us him, like, learning that. It was a very effective, like, character bust out of the new technique that you had all the information for them logically progressing to up to that point. And so I think the same thing goes here, though. And there's a couple things I want to talk about whenever we get back to that little clash, but really just, like, Ichigo has been fighting to protect people and has been fighting to save people, but against Hollows, it was maybe a little bit easier for him to fight, especially knowing that he was just purifying them. Obviously, we had that whole moment with Sora back whenever Acid Wire was attacking Orihime, and there was a question of resolve, especially as the mask broke and revealed that Hollows are humans, just human spirits that have been twisted. Their desires have shaped them into their most awful form, and so that moment showed a lack of resolve on Ichigo's part, but then he was able to quickly kind of gather his resolve because of where everybody pushed him. I mean, obviously, Sora stabs himself through the throat at the end of the day, but we still very much got the sense that after that, Ichigo had a bit more resolve to fight Hollows. Now he's fighting against, ostensibly human spirits, but Shinigami, and so it's a little bit harder for him to bring down his blade, and he's kind of forgotten that resolve that Urahara was teaching him, and he needs to remember, like, oh well, if I'm really going to fight people that are kind of powerful and on the kind of level of power that I'm going to, I need to have that resolve. And of course, we call back to, if you remember, Ichigo was constantly running away from Urahara in the beginning of the fight, so I love that he's running away here, even whenever he's awakened Zangetsu, right? I love that, like, I'd been killed if I hadn't run. He's like, well, yeah, I'm doing my best to corner you. It's really good. I love that Urahara is very clearly a character that knows he's pushing certain results, right? He knows how to get what he wants out of somebody. And you can really see Bleach, especially in the Soul Society arc, you can really read it as like Urahara has these invested interests and he's really pushing Ichigo to certain, goals, right? So it's Urahara that's enabling this rescue of Rukia, Urahara that's enabling this invasion of Soul Society. And to what end, we don't know yet, but you can really interpret this, especially the growth that Ichigo has under Urahara's tutelage. That Urahara is, maybe, I wouldn't say puppeteering Ichigo, but certainly has a very strong hand in his development and in driving him towards the kind of fighter, the kind of person that he needs to be. Not just for his sake, but also for whatever Urahara's schemes and plans are, right? It doesn't seem malicious to us at this point, but it could very well could be. We don't know this man. And he is, shady, but maybe trustworthy? Who knows? Nevertheless, we're reminded of Ichigo's capability, right? He hasn't done anything on this level quite yet. This cleaving like a mountain and a half kind of nonsense creates a fissure, this killing blow, this dispersal of energy that Zangetsu is capable of. We have not seen that from Ichigo in any part of the Soul Society arc. Yes, he cut, he shattered Jidambo's axes. Yes, he broke that one wall, but nothing of this magnitude. And I like that. Like, I like that we've got Ichigo's power, but it's clearly on like a little bit of a lesser level than what we saw showcased earlier, even in that clash between him and Urahara. And if you're wondering why Ichigo hasn't gone all out, it's because he hasn't been truly pushed to this limit. I would maybe argue that Ikaku kind of cornered him, had him in a moment where he had to really strike or be killed, but it was still maybe more out of survival than it was out of killing intent, right? And of course, Ichigo expresses like, well, yeah, I was just pushed to a corner. I can't do this on command. And here I was like, well, yeah, you need to be able to do strikes like this on command. You need to be able to learn how to fight and use this power at your will, not just whenever you're in a life or death. Well, I mean, all moments are going to be life or death. It's a battle, but being able to do it before you feel threatened to that point, before you're pushed into that corner, so that you don't have to be consistently flirting with that level of danger, right? And we get the iteration, like, yes, his strength is about third or fourth seat, so like obviously to conquer somebody who is lieutenant or higher level, he's going to have to fight this way, because that's the way that assumably they would fight, right? That's sort of the thing that's keeping somebody from being in that upper echelon. And so, of course, I like that Kisuke then pushes it on him again. Really great, kind of Ichigo being pushed to the right of the page. This is interesting that he has that he's sort of shunted into this position of kind of being worked upon or being pushed back. Again, we read right to left, right? So he's going to be, we too are sort of being pushed back with Urahara. It's an interesting kind of way of moving us. And yes, I love that he gets flung here. This great shot of Benihime here as well. Just slings him from that block into the mountain, which Ururu and Tessai are rushing to maybe and save his life, but Urahara wants to push him even further, right? And I do love that, we have this like Urahara just pop, 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 like traipsing up the side of the cliff as Ichigo's trying to recover. I always love these shots of Ichigo where he's like really kind of resting on Zangetsu and kind of pulling himself up on Zangetsu. I think that's such a cool way of like really utilizing the physicality of the blade, and I think it gives a lot of weight to it, literally and metaphorically. Especially if you think of Zangetsu as this partner that he's fighting alongside, right? So I can imagine, like, if they were two people, them shoulder on shoulder, kind of Zangetsu lending Ichigo the support that he needs. So it's very cool. I love that sort of visual. And speaking of lovely visuals, I love Urahara leaping up over the top of this kind of plateau to strike Ichigo, ready to strike already. Ichigo realizing that, and then immediately the strike coming in the next panel. Ichigo's just flown off the top of this plateau. I love this sequence of just like this unexpected, like, oh, he's already ready to hit me. Ichigo realizing that and then getting smacked into another mountain. Yeah, it's good stuff. Of course, here Urahara talks a mean game. He's really talking down to Ichigo. And yeah, there's this idea of like what your blade resonates with, right? That you have this killing intent, but that can also be felt through your weapon. And I like the especially the Zanpakuto is an extension of the self, right? As this thing that embodies your technique, your sensations, some aspect of your soul. And so if you're full of fear, that can be felt through, like, your blade resonates with that fear. And it's made almost manifest, whereas that killing intent can be manifest as well. And yeah, I like this, like, fear won't bring you victory. Nothing's born of fear. It should be, this assuredness, right? This full intent. And this is another thing that, again, to kind of loop back to that argument that gets made time to time, that Ichigo is a reactionary protagonist. I mean, that's part of his character at the beginning that he has to grow from, right? That he's not going to just react with fear, that he's afraid that something might happen, and so he has to react appropriately. But instead, that whenever things are going to happen that he doesn't like, that he's decisive, right? And I think that sort of thing gets lost on readers, especially ones that aren't paying that much attention. But I think there is this decisive sort of change in Ichigo's character that starts to happen around this arc, and it's nice to see. I mean, there's a good bit of decisiveness to him anyway, but that resolve is really important. And I mean, we've seen Ichigo display that resolve, especially whenever he agreed to do this training that may get him killed, and in fact, it did get him killed. As we know, Tessai severed his soul chain. That literally did kill him. So, of course, Ichigo realizing that. I love this panel. Anytime Ichigo lifts and gets you overhead, I think it just creates such a great arc. It's really good stuff. Lots of momentum to it. And of course, this pleases Urahara because it means that he's tutored a pupil that is powerful. And I like that we just get these shots of their blades and then them kind of in conflict with one another. I think it's good stuff. I don't know about the sound effects being like, Nevertheless, they are both able to disperse this kind of powerful energy from their slashes, right? And that clash comes back, and we get Ichigo just grabbing Zabimaru by the tooth of the sword. And really, in a lot of ways, it reminds me of, if you will remember, whenever Ichigo went to strike Byakuya, and maybe he was going after Renji, actually. Rather, whenever Byakuya stops Ichigo's sword and is able to just completely grab it and snap it in half, it's very reminiscent of that, right? The idea that, like, you're going to have to come at somebody with much more sort of killing intent. Maybe here Renji lacks that sort of intent, or rather Ichigo's resolve is just so great that he's able to grab Renji's weapon. Of course, it bloodies his hand, so it's not quite on the level of finesse or absolute resolve that perhaps Captain Kuchiki has. But nevertheless, I do like that Renji, he's shocked, of course. He's not expecting his sword to just be grabbed like that after, like, swinging it down. And Ichigo apologizes because now he can truly fight. And I do love that, of course, we get this to really highlight that. We have this shaded face into looking up. We have Ichigo with a very serious expression. Bloodied, but not defeated, right? And of course, this two panel right here does a lot of work. You know, that he's resolved now to kill Renji. And Renji's absolute shock at that, right? That he realizes, you know, he's like, oh, what, you know, how is he getting all this power? How's he getting back up? And it's like, well, Renji, you should realize that, like, Ichigo had a kind of revelation, like, yeah, I'm ready to kill you. And here we get that sound effect too, reminding us that now Renji is seeing Ichigo coming at him with absolute resolve to actually kill Renji. I love that Renji tries to stop that, like to stuff that out by coming in with a slash, and is immediately just torn asunder, his own weapon shredded and broken as Ichigo cleaves through him, straight up breaks the goggles again, of course, and we get this really wonderful, like his hair, strikes out. We get the huge spray of hair as he is cut from elbow to hip. What am I saying? Elbow to hip, shoulder to hip, just kind of like in the same way that Ikaku was. So Ichigo really does like that across the body slash. I think it is also pretty phenomenal for showing kind of a grievous wound anyway. But yeah, shatters Renji's released Shikai, his Zabimaru. And that is at the end of the chapter. And so, kind of going off, we had the previous chapter that had Zabimaru, and assumably you could make the assumption that this might be Zangetsu pulling back with blood. But I could also read that as Zabimaru. Like, if I go back to where the previous chapter ended, we have the end of the blade kind of pulling back. So I don't know. I tend to read it as not just like a closer in thing of Zabimaru pulling away with blood, like not just like this isolated, but instead I tend to kind of read it as Zangetsu pulling back with blood as well, that we've had these two blades kind of sink into each other, and this sort of exchange happening, right? Ichigo realizing that he has to fight with more resolve. But yeah, all in all, a pretty quick chapter, mostly a battle that happens, mostly a flashback that consumes most of the dialogue, but we're given reason for why Ichigo can overcome Renji and why he might not have been able to before. Not just awakening his Zanpakuto, realizing that he has Zangetsu and he's wielding his own true power now, not just Rukia's power that he was kind of heavy lifting and it was just him kind of clinging around almost a toy comparatively. Which again should tell you how strong hollows really are, right? Like at least at this level, like the average hollow is, dog water. That's why lower ranked characters are sent to deal with hollows. It's not lieutenants and captains aren't making trips to Earth to fight regular hollows. Now, if you start talking about something like Grant Fisher, that's a different story, right? Nevertheless, and like Minos Grande, right? You have to have this sort of resolve, this ability to really kind of want to kill whatever is in front of you. And I like that this chapter does a good job of kind of establishing, no, Ichigo is on this level. He is capable of taking on that sort of opponent. He just had to remind himself of that resolve. He had to really step into that other world of kind of fighting and not really, not be clinging on to the fear that he had before. All in all, this idea of not holding on to fear and of fear itself and of resolve, I think resolve is maybe something that's a little bit more potent and present throughout all of Bleach, right? The characters have the strong resolve. They are not in conflict with themselves out of fear or whatever other desires, but instead they show the strong resolve for whatever it may be. We'll get that with our antagonists too, and I mean that's what creates a good conflict. You have two characters that are resolved to see a thing through, and that draws them at odds with each other, or even with themselves, right? A character in conflict with themselves can be just as interesting a story as a character in conflict with someone else. But given this is a shonen battle manga, it's mostly going to be characters in conflict with each other, let's be real. So, all in all, I do enjoy the chapter. I think it's got some strong, kind of evocative art for the battle. Very kind of cool posing, very very tight action scenes. Whenever I say evocative, it's very much you're able to follow it on page, and it feels like it has that strength of presence and that sort of power to it because of the way that it's paneled out, because of the way that certain like wind ups and swings are given to us. And yeah, it's good stuff. I really do like this chapter. I think this fight in general is a pretty cool fight. It's short and it's sweet, and I like it. It gets a bit stretched out in the anime, as far as I remember. I tend to prefer manga for the fights in general, because a lot of them can feel stretched out in the anime. Though there are some exceptions where fights are handled a little bit better and are more spectacle in the anime than they tend to be in the manga. And I'll bring those up as we get to them. But yeah, this one's fantastic in the manga, and I'd have to revisit the anime to really know for sure. But I remember feeling like it was maybe a tinge too long in the anime. Nevertheless, good stuff. Definitely a good read. I enjoyed this one. Let's talk about spoilers, right? Let's talk about how this chapter connects to the rest of Bleach. And immediately, of course, the big thing to think about is, yes, he shatters Renji's sword here, but it's only a Shikai release. It's not his Bankai release. And yes, Ichigo, resolve being a thing that reinforces your Rietsu, that makes it harder for you to be attacked, like that solidification of Rietsu. That's kind of showcased here, right? That Ichigo's hand isn't cut off by Renji's attack, not because of some technique like Blut Vene or whatever, but because Ichigo is just simply got that Rietsu in force and is actually like making use of it. Sort of like how later on, whenever Ichigo goes to slice Kenpachi, he's unable to because he's unable to focus his reishi or his Rietsu really to such a fine point that he's able to overcome what Kenpachi is just naturally kind of putting off. At least not until later in the fight, right? So that's the same sort of thing that is happening here. That Ichigo has found this resolve, and his resolve has allowed his reishi to densen to the point where he can just catch Renji's sword. Now, of course, what's worth mentioning is, and if you're like, oh, well, this makes Renji out to be really weak. Ichigo can just catch his sword. He's not even cut by it. And one, Ichigo's our protagonist and is like a super child, so take that with a grain of salt. But the other thing is that I would say in this moment, in this fight, Renji doesn't really have killing intent. He doesn't have that same resolve. I think Renji is intending to defeat Ichigo here, maybe even kill Ichigo here, but Renji is still in conflict too, because Renji doesn't truly believe that Rugia can be saved. Or can't be saved, that's what I'm saying. That Renji would really prefer that Rukia can be saved. Maybe not that Ichigo would be the one doing it, but nevertheless, there's a part of Renji that is in conflict with himself, that he is not fully resolved to strike the killing blow here, and ergo would be striking with weaker kind of Reiatsu in general to what he is maybe capable of. So yeah, I don't read this as like, oh, well, Ichigo needs to be propped up to seem cool, so Renji has to be brought down and wharfed or jobbed or whatever you want to call it. I think this is more a reflection on a character's resolve and the strength that resolve can give a character. And it just so happens that, of course, Renji is in conflict with himself over the whole Rukia thing and, fighting Ichigo, right? Interesting that here he dodges it, and Renji's not like, yeah, it's Shunpo, nerd. But it's just like, you're slow. Otherwise, yeah, you're already dead is kind of funny, because Ichigo has died how many times now? Technically, right? But going back to Urahara, talking about kind of Urahara plans, right? The Urahara is very much trying to get Ichigo to be able to use the Getsuga, of course, our favorite technique, before it gets used forever, all the time. But the origins of Getsuga. Yeah. I don't really know that I have much to say about Urahara. I like that he knows, very clearly understands the power structure of Soul Society. Having been a captain in the past, this makes sense. And so is able to really be like, well, yeah, you're about this level, you know. But at this point, we know for sure Urahara has been a captain. It's been shown to us. So really, that isn't that much of a spoiler, right? Ichigo at this point isn't aware. He hasn't been made aware even in the actual manga. But I love this, like, I'm driving you to the edge to make you remember. Um, like, the memory of what it is to be able to call forth that power. And I mean, if you really think about Ichigo's power, yes, there is great memory there, especially whenever you start to talk about his Quincy power, right? Ties into this whole legacy of power. Now, this conversation on fear and like that compromising someone's resolve and the power that they have to do this attack. I think it's pertinent to think of Asnot, Sternritter, the fear, obviously, and so the idea that he could affect a character with fear and therefore like lower them to this kind of weaker level, I think makes sense, right? If he's able to really shift a character in this way of thinking, so I think that's kind of cute. Um, that like that explains why characters like Byakuya are so kind of neutered by the fear, because fear and resolve are such important things. And I like that. Like that's something that's resonant throughout Bleach. It's not just here, in chapter what is this 97, but all the way to the end, right? Even the final arc, fear and resolve are pretty significant factors in a fight. So that's kind of cool. I do like that this sort of swords up Zangetsu in the air. This does kind of become the iconic Ichigo pose for a Getsuga, right? That lifted sword into the crash down. So that's kind of cool that we really get that here. But even cooler is that, of course, whenever we go to Bankai, it's sort of halfway. It's facing the opponent. So this is an interesting like prelude to that almost. But I do love that this ends up being the kind of Getsuga pose. And yeah, I mean, we get that pose again, I believe. We get both these poses, right? So we get the pose, like the really, like the sword up pose, I'm pretty sure we get, but also the like leaning against the sword, while not at Haggard, but pushing it down into the Sokyoku is something that we get as well later whenever he goes to rescue Rukia. So both of those kind of poses that Ichigo makes. And I love that this mirrors here the pose that Urahara is making, right? As he lifts his sword and it's got this killing intent, and he's about to use not his Getsugo, but his version of it, whatever it is called. I don't remember, one of the Benihime sort of attacks. And so that pose mirrors one that Urahara taught him, right? This pose here is exactly the pose that Urahara is making. So it's kind of cool. Kind of cool that Urahara he knows that Ichigo's capable of Getsuga, probably because he knows Ichigo's father, and technically, as far as we're aware, Ishin was capable of Getsuga, so that's kind of neat that there's a bit of a connection there. And so Urahara is essentially teaching Ichigo how to do that here, and then he does. How about that? Yeah, I don't have really anything else to say here. I just wanted to get to Ichigo. I wanted to get to Renji getting completely smashed out. Ichigo just goes full in and splatters that boy. That's it. That's all I had to say for this one. Yeah. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting through this. If you have anything that you want to add, anything that you want to talk about, any particular panel or art that you'd like to discuss, or narrative kind of things, feel free. I think this chapter is kind of introduces a few things, but otherwise is pretty thematically cohesive and kind of builds on the narrative in ways that are interesting. Certainly, we didn't get the sense that Renji was going to win this fight, but nevertheless, it is kind of cool to see that sudden turnabout, um, and exciting. And maybe you could call that, like, you can call that what you will, like, oh, what, he just gets the resolve to win, and it's like, well, yeah, that's kind of the point. That Ichigo wasn't fighting with a fully stacked deck, you know. Anyway, that's all I have for this one. Again, I really do appreciate you watching the video. I really do appreciate you getting all the way through to this part. Please to give the video a like if you were able to get to this moment. Otherwise, you know, I want to kind of bring the conversation further in the comments. So if you do have anything that you're curious about, just drop me a comment and let me know, and I am really happy to kind of engage there. Otherwise, if you'd like to take this support for the channel to a different mode, I'm not going to say a further step. It certainly could be further, but a different way of supporting me for sure is the Patreon. And so the link is in the description for this video, but also should be here. But basically, anybody that supports me on Patreon, your name will be listed at the end of the video as my current patrons are listed. And I want to give a huge thanks to those folks. Thank you so much for supporting me in creating Bleach Revisited and all the work that I do for the Karakura Gold channel. I really do appreciate it. It helps quite a lot. But if you're curious, you can always go there and donate as much as you would like, as often or as infrequently as you would like. Every little bit helps. That all said, that's it for the video, folks. I look forward to continuing this story arc. It is some of my favorite stuff in Bleach, and often, you know, most other people's favorites. So, look forward to the next couple of them, because it gets really good. If you're not already vibing with it as is. Nevertheless, this has been Karakura Gold, reminding you that spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.